Okay. So, good afternoon to everybody. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Dr. Dídac Llorens Cubedo, who is professor at the Spanish Spanish National University of Distance Education. His field of research is English and American literature, and he's interested especially in modernism, Victorianism, neo-Victorianism, comparative literature, and then the dialogue, the artistic dialogue across arts. Now, above all, he is a Pound scholar. He wrote a beautiful book, which was also his PhD dissertation, a comparative study on T.S. Eliot and Salvador Espriu, which has a subtitle, Converging Poetic Imaginations. And although he has also edited a book on new literatures of old, dialogues of tradition and innovation in Anglophone literatures. He is basically an editor of Eliot. He has a wonderful website, and he has edited this big fat book on T.S. Eliot's theater, T.S. Eliot's theater being a field of research that hasn't been studied, and he creates a kind of revival. I mean, it has been studied, but not as much as his poetry. And he has also edited a very recent book on T.S. Eliot's later writings, The Rose Garden and After, which comprises studies between 1930s and 1950s. And he also is the director of two research projects that have been funded by the Spanish ministry. Okay, and he also keeps a blog, and he's also the general editor of a journal called Epos. And today we will have the privilege of listening to his speech, Selves, Images, Projections, from T.S. Eliot's Preludes to the Cocktail Party. Well, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Viorica, for the important part you play in organizing these lectures. I'm very honored to be part of them. And thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm going to try and share my presentation. I hope you can see it and you can hear me as well. Yeah. Very good. So, this is my title, Selves, Images, Projections from T.S. Eliot's Preludes to the Cocktail Party. I intend to discuss, in general terms, T.S. Eliot and cinema, considering a poem of his, Preludes, a play, The Cocktail Party, and several of his critical essays. I'm going to be moving back and forth a little bit, but I'll try to be as chronological as possible. And I will begin by focusing on this early poem by Eliot called Preludes. It was composed while he was a student in Harvard and Paris before he returned to Europe and decided to stay in England. This was in 1914. The following year, in 1915, the poem Preludes was included in the second and final issue of the modernist journal Blast, modernist, vorticist journal Blast. It had only 2 issues. It was edited by Wyndham Lewis, whom you can see in the central picture here. And finally, in 1917, the poem Preludes appeared in Prufrock and Other Observations, which was Eliot's first poetry collection. The title, Preludes, implies a musical metaphor. In music, prelude is defined as a short, free-form piece of music, originally one serving as an introduction to a longer and more complex piece. Later, starting with the Romantic period, generally a stand-alone piece. This definition of prelude in music connotes the sense of something fragmentary or incomplete. And in its second sense, which is also important, it connotes a lyrical tone. John Cooper, a prominent Eliot scholar, has written about this, about Eliot's modernist refashioning of the 19th century lyric, and he considers Preludes and other early poems by Eliot. In a chapter, I've included the reference here. This is a chapter in a book that John Cooper edited. You may know about it, T.S. Eliot's Orchestra. This is a book on Eliot and music. And as I was saying, this chapter, Thinking with Your Ears, includes an analysis of preludes. I think I missed the S there. Thinking with Your Ears, Rhapsody, Preludes. No, Rhapsody, Prelude song. It's in the singular in Eliot's early lyrics. So Preludes, Eliot's poem, is divided into 4 parts. We find a contrast between indoor and outdoor settings. We have the observation of urban street life, probably inspired by Boston, which is a city that Eliot knew very well. The poem contains sensual, olfactory imagery. It also contains images of isolation, alienation, impersonality, anonymity, which we could say are typically modernist. And we also have these characters who behave a little bit like automatons, as we will see in some of the quotes I'll be sharing with you. This is a bit of a curiosity. The poem also contains the verse line, "The burnt out ends of smoky days." If you've seen or if you're familiar with the musical Cats, this line will might be familiar to you. It was included in the lyrics of the famous song Memory from the musical Cats. This is a song composed by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Trevor Nunn. The musical Cats, as you probably know, was inspired by Eliot's collection of children's poetry, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. You have the cover here on the right. The following lines are from a memorable scene in section 3 of the poem Preludes. You tossed a blanket from the bed. You lay upon your back and waited. You dozed and watched the night revealing the 1,000 sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling. These lines have been connected with early cinema and magic lantern shows. It is striking that in the lines I've just read, visual images should be considered the constituents of a soul, and that the subject should be able to see them in a state of partial consciousness between sleep and wakefulness on an external flat surface. The subject of the poem sees the images projected on the ceiling, as in an early flickering film projection. And you may have noticed in the lines I read that there is a reference of the lyrical subject tossing the blanket, covering them, and this may remind us of the raising of the curtain that used to cover the screen in cinemas before the film was projected. The you in section 3 of Preludes must be a woman, although there is never a she, but we may assume that this is a woman because of a reference to hair curlers. You curled the papers from your hair. This is another line from the poem. The images of her soul are sordid, in coherence with other olfactory and visual images in Preludes. Faint, stale smells of beer, grimy scraps, muddy feet, dingy shades, soiled hands. She has a different type of vision in the morning through a window that we could think of as a screen. And this is a vision linked with revelation. This will be my second quote from the poem. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. This is the same woman who saw the sordid images in her soul projected on the ceiling. In section 2 of the poem, we had a glimpse, this is an earlier section, we had a glimpse of anonymous street life, as we see in primitive film recordings where you see people coming out of a factory or you see people walking up and down the streets. The sawdust trampled street with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands. The lines that I will read in a second take us indoors. As I said, the poem alternates between streets and rooms, indoor and outdoor settings. And with the same connotations of impersonal anonymity, the lines evoke the shadow plays that prefigured cinema. You have a picture here of a shadow play, an early shadow play. And the lines from Preludes go, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. You will remember that I mentioned characters that behave a little bit like automatons. We often have references to body parts rather than people with a defined personality, so body parts doing things. In section 4 of Preludes, we are given a sense of objective observation of the urban landscape. A city block, blackened street, vacant lots. These are all images from section 4. This contrasts with the surrealist image of a man's soul stretched tight against the sky. This has a bit of a reminiscence of the poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So the woman and the man in Preludes are among the characters in Eliot's poems from the 1910s who, as David Trotter notes, seem to have been taken up into or construed as a space of projection. So characters as spaces of projection. And projection is going to be a key word for us today. If you are interested in the relationship between literary modernism and cinema, these are two useful basic secondary sources. One of them, which I have already quoted from, is David Trotter's Cinema and Modernism on the left, where he reflects on the relationship between literary modernism and cinema, with special attention to Joyce, Eliot, and Woolf. There's specific chapters on each of them. On the other hand, we also have Susan McCabe's Cinematic Modernism, Modernist Poetry and Film, which also considers the technology of cinema, editing, montage, and includes chapters dedicated to Gertrude Stein, William Carlos Williams, HD, and Marianne Moore. So it's very good that between the two they cover the main figures of modernism. So we've talked about Preludes, and I would like to now to move forward to consider a play written some 30 years later, The Cocktail Party. But we cannot ignore what happens in between, what happens to Eliot and his work between 1917 and 1949. Eliot, we have Preludes in 1917. Eliot publishes The Wasteland in 1922. He becomes a British citizen and joins the Church of England as an Anglo-Catholic in 1927. This changes the orientation of his work and makes it primarily Christian. He attains success with the play Murder in the Cathedral in 1935 and decides to pursue a career as a dramatist. And he also completes, around the years of the Second World War, and during those years, he completes the sequence of religious meditative poems for quartets between 1936 and 1942. These are the essential the dates and works. There are others, of course, but these are the most important to my argument. Although neglected in Eliot's scholarship today, The Cocktail Party is important in many ways as a first. It was his first comedy, and specifically high comedy. We will talk a little bit about this later on. It was his first attempt at reaching a wide audience. It was his first commercial success as a playwright. The play did very well at the West End in London and on Broadway in New York. And it was also the first play where he uses an accentual verse pattern consistently for every register and situation. These are images, by the way, of a production of the play in Madrid in 1956 at the Maria Guerrero Theatre, 1956. But before we focus on The Cocktail Party, I would like to examine Eliot's relationship with film. And we may go back even further. I said I was going to move back and forth a little. We may go even further than 1917, the year of Preludes. We may go back to 1904. And this is the year of St. Louis World's Fair, or it's also called the Louisiana Purchase Exhibition in 1904. St. Louis in the state of Missouri was Eliot's hometown, and he was 16 when the exhibition took place. In his story of film, Mark Cousins describes a cinematic attraction that was especially successful. This was a room which was like a replica of a train, and there was a screen at the end of the room, and people sat as if they were sitting on a train, and to get the impression of movement from the projection at the end. This is how Mark Cousins describes it. The 1904 St. Louis exhibition featured Hale's tours, which included earlier footage of phantom ride shots projected inside a railway carriage, manipulated to stimulate the movement of a real train. So a phantom shot, a phantom ride shot, is a short film taken, usually taken from the back of a train, which gives you the impression of movement when you watch it. I'm not sure if Eliot saw this, but I like to think that he did, because he was in St. Louis after all in 1904. You may have seen the film Meet Me in St. Louis. This is a film from 1944, which is set in Eliot's city during the World's Fair. It was directed by Vincent Minnelli, and it started Judy Garland. Since Christmas is near, I thought I would mention the song "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," which was composed specifically for this film. It features another song that has an Eliot connection. It's an American vaudeville song from 1904 called "Under the Bamboo Tree," which is, you have a picture of on the right. This is the scene where the character played by Judy Garland and her little sister sing this song, "Under the Bamboo Tree." And it was also quoted by Eliot in his play, in his dramatic poem, Sweeney Agonistes, in the mid-20s. It's an interesting song. It's politically incorrect nowadays, but as I said, it was quoted by Eliot in Sweeney Agonistes. The earliest reference to film in Eliot's criticism is probably in his article Mary Lloyd from 1922, which is an obituary for a beloved music hall artist of the time. I'm going to play a video. It's very short. There's no sound, but you can see Mary Lloyd dancing. This is, I think, the only recording that exists of Mary Lloyd. I'm afraid we're going to get an ad first, because it is YouTube, but I hope we can get rid of it after a few seconds.
¿Sabes cuánto vale nuestro coche?
En comprarnostucoche.es lo saben. Vende tu coche rápido.
Okay, so this was Mary Lloyd. She was a big celebrity before, actually, at the beginning of the 20th century. So in Mary Lloyd, Eliot laments her death as precipitating the fatal decline of the music hall, a genre that he thought could serve as an inspiration for the renewal of modern drama. This is parallel with the rise of cinema, where the interaction between performers and audiences, characteristic of the music hall, is lost. Cinema was becoming the most popular form of entertainment, but Eliot dismisses it as mass entertainment. And this is what he says about cinema in Mary Lloyd. With the decay of the music hall, with the encroachment of the cheap and rapid breeding cinema, the lower classes will tend to drop into the same state of protoplasm as the bourgeoisie. The working man who went to the music hall and saw Mary Lloyd and joined in the chorus will now go to the cinema, where his mind is lulled by continuous, senseless music and continuous action, too rapid for the brain to act upon, and will receive without giving. The binary oppositions implicit in this quote are music hall versus cinema, obviously, lower or working classes versus the bourgeoisie, interaction, performer audience against passive reception, the interaction of the music hall versus the passive reception of cinema. It's critical standpoint against cinema is comparable to Theodor Adorno's on jazz. In Adorno's essay on jazz from 1936, he dismisses the genre in associating it with mass culture, as Eliot does with cinema. Mass culture and mass reproduction, with a musical industry which he considers inimical to true artistic merit. Eliot's essay, Mary Lloyd, was published, as I said, in 1922. This is the same year as The Wasteland. Radio or cinema are absent from the poem, but we find references to other symbols of modern life, such as cars. But at my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. This is a parody, you may know, a parody of Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress. But at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near. So we have cars. We also have the gramophone, which made the commercial distribution of music, which Adorno laments, which he finds objectionable. Commercial distribution of music was made possible by the gramophone in the early 20th century. These lines are from also from The Wasteland, from the scene of the typist and the young man carbuncular. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. The telephone, that other symbol of modernity, plays a central role in Sweeney Agonistes, in the opening scene. I don't think we have the telephone features in The Wasteland, unless I'm missing something, but it appears in Sweeney Agonistes. The year after Mary Lloyd and The Wasteland, Eliot published another essay. It was a review rather than an essay. It was called The Beating of a Drum. This is from 1923. And here he presents cinema in a slightly more positive light. And he praises Charlie Chaplin for the rhythm in his acting, which he not only considers the key to his comical effectiveness, but he also thinks that modern drama, he also suggests that modern drama should take Chaplin's acting as a model, the rhythm in his acting. Interestingly, Chaplin had started out as a music hall performer, and he represents the continuity between music hall and cinema. Both Trotter and McCabe, the authors of the two books I recommended, write about Chaplin. There's chapters on Chaplin in their books. And in the article, T.S. Eliot and Cinema, David Trotter makes an interesting distinction between cinema as popular entertainment and film as an art form. He distinguishes between cinema and film. The latter, film, is represented, for example, by the French filmmaker, critic, and theorist Jean Epstein, who was Eliot's contemporary, we could say. He was, I think, about 10 years younger. A text announcing a retrospective on Epstein at the Vienna Film Festival for next year, for 2026, presents Epstein, and you have the quote here, as bridging avant-garde experimentation and poetic realism. And I think a perfect illustration of that is the final scene of Epstein's film Cœur Fidèle from 1923, the same year as the beating of a drum. And I'd like to play that final scene. It's a little less than 2 minutes. And I hope we don't get any help now. Of course, this was a silent film, but this music has been added to it, and I decided to leave the music because it's quite nice. Okay, it's a love story. It doesn't end very well, but I think the scene illustrates very well that combination of avant-garde experimentation and poetic realism. We could also think of Dali and Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou, which was from 1929, 6 years later, and is the film that best captures the spirit of surrealism, another of the avant-garde trends. We mentioned vorticism at the beginning. Surrealism would be another of the avant-garde trends. As David Trotter shows, Eliot was interested in Epstein. He was interested in Jan Epstein's writings on poetry. He not only made films, but he wrote several books discussing the connections between poetry and cinema. And Eliot was interested in them. He mentions them in several of his letters. At the same time, and despite the ideas set forth in Mary Lloyd, Eliot was also familiar with the narrative conventions and techniques of popular cinema. So we have, on the one hand, his interest in film as an art, but on the other, his enjoyment of popular cinema. This is from an article by Trotter, T.S. Eliot and Cinema. Eliot was a good deal more interested in cinema than he was in film. The genres that most exercised his imagination, the Western, slapstick comedy, were all in the mainstream. Indeed, they were the mainstream. So Trotter argues that despite Eliot's interest in Epstein, he was more interested in cinema as a popular art. An important, relatively recent source in Eliot's studies is his correspondence with Emily Hale, who was an amateur actress and speech and drama teacher with whom he was romantically involved. They met in early youth, but she remained in the United States, and they only spent time together occasionally. However, they exchanged over 1,000 letters, imagine, over 1,000 letters over several decades. And these letters were sealed for many years after their deaths, and they were finally made public in 2020. Of course, they talk about their personal lives, they discuss a number of issues, but they also talk about literature, drama, and cinema. They discuss Chaplin, they discuss Disney films, Mae West, or the Marx Brothers. Eliot was a fan of Groucho Marx. He wrote to him. He dedicated a comic poem to him, and he received a signed photograph of Groucho Marx that he displayed in his office. They met later in life and became friends. So we have all these references to the popular cinema of Eliot's time. He also had an experience of direct involvement with cinema. His 1935 play, Murder in the Cathedral, the story, you may know this is the story of the assassination of the Archbishop Thomas Becket in the 12th century, was adapted by the director George Höllering in 1952. You have a photograph there of Eliot with Höllering. Höllering was an Austrian-born director. He emigrated first to Hungary and then to England in the mid-30s, escaping Nazism. His wife was Jewish. And Eliot had an active part in the writing of the script for the film of Murder in the Cathedral. He even supplied additional scenes to provide a wider context, such as the scene of the trial in the castle of Northampton. And he even had an acting part as the voice of one of the characters who tempt Becket, the fourth tempter, who's the most important. I'm going to play another short video. This is only about a minute. I wish I could play the video where Eliot reads, but I couldn't find that. This is a video showing the arrival of the Archbishop Thomas Becket, the return of Becket to Canterbury. And you can see this we talked about poetic cinema, poetic realism, and experimentation. I think we can see that here as well. Right. So Eliot had been working on the film with Höllering since the early 40s, but he found it difficult initially, as he admitted to Hale in a letter from 1942. I find it hard to take the cinema seriously, and I'm always more aware of what is lost on the screen that can be done so well on the stage than of the things that the film can do that the stage cannot. The latter interests me less. In one of the several writings where Eliot looks back on his involvement in the film, he suggests that cinema should aspire to the condition of art rather than sink to the lowest level of what the greatest number of empty-headed people are willing to look at. This is from an essay called Poetry and Film. He collaborated with Höllering because he wanted to find out how films were made, and admitted that he made some progress in understanding and appreciating the possibilities of poetic drama from the film director's point of view. So Eliot's attitude to film was ambivalent and at times contradictory, an elitist vision of cinema as an art form on the one hand, and his own consumption and enjoyment of popular movies on the other. But we'll now go back to The Cocktail Party, which premiered in 1949, 3 years before the release of Höllering's Murder in the Cathedral. And contrasting with the criticism and uncertain fascination of earlier decades, here Eliot portrays cinema as an artistic and economic activity in this, his first comedy. The Cocktail Party is a drawing room comedy, the most popular genre in commercial theatres at the time. It is high comedy, which often deals with individual faults or conflicts that have a social, moral, or metaphysical dimension. Importantly, The Cocktail Party is Eliot's first purely realistic play. We have 4 middle class or lower middle class, if you like, characters living in London, a couple undergoing a marital crisis, Edward and Lavinia Chamberlain, and on the other hand, their 2 younger friends, Celia and Peter, who are dynamic and artistic. And it is initially suggested that Celia and Peter might be attracted to each other, but they are later estranged and their relationship is frustrated. Interestingly, this is expressed through a cinematic metaphor, a fade-off effect. And according to Peter, Celia, and I quote, has simply faded into some other picture. Early in the play, we find out that Celia and Peter are in fact having adulterous relationships with Edward and Lavinia, respectively. Apart from these 4 characters, there are 3 other characters who are angelic guardians. This is the word that Eliot uses. He calls them guardians. And these are Sir Henry, Julia, and Alex, and they will help the other 4, Edward, Lavinia, Peter, and Celia, to find their way. Celia and Peter are both interested in the art of the film. This is a quote from the play. Celia writes poetry, but she also dreams of becoming an actress. Peter travels back and forth to California, to Hollywood, where he's trying to carve out a future for himself as a scriptwriter. He is employed by an apparently successful company, Pan Am Eagle, and is working with prominent tycoons in the business. But in the 3rd act of the play, he gives the impression of being existentially lost, a sign of which is his professional dissatisfaction. And what a métier! I've tried to believe in it so that I might believe in myself. I thought I had ideas to make a revolution in the cinema that no one could ignore, and here I am making a second-rate film. This second-rate film is a film of English life, this is how Peter describes it, for which a replica of an English country house, Boltwell, is to be built in California. Given the transcendent orientation of the play, This project, which now occupies most of Peter's time, suggests a shallow world of futile pretense. Eliot presents Peter's Hollywood career as a particularly unglamorous aspect of the ordinary world. Peter has made it to Hollywood. He has succeeded in a way. He's painstakingly trying to find his place in the industry, but he has been unable to attain his dream of becoming a film artist. Peter's disillusionment will deepen when he learns about Celia's fate. Eliot presents Celia as someone completely dissatisfied with her life, someone who has lost the will to live a conventional life and strives to find new meaning for it. She's presented as a modern saint. She will become a nun. She will join a nursing order and serve in a mission in the imaginary land of Kinkanja. An insurrection will rise in Kinkanja and Celia will be killed. She will die a sacrificial death. And you may be wondering, is this in a comedy? And the answer is yes, this is this is part of a comedy. How Eliot manages to incorporate this episode always amazes me, but he always defended it as perfectly logical in the context of the play. So we could establish a connection between Celia and the protagonist of the 1947 British film Black Narcissus by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, adapted from the 1939 novel by Ruma Godden. A young girl, Claudia, played by Deborah Kerr, is traumatized by war and a frustrated relationship. She becomes a nun and a missionary in India. The film work by Powell and Pressburger, known as The Archers, has been brought into relation with Eliot's poetry and drama. You have two examples here, two articles which connect The Wasteland with one of their films, A Canterbury Tale, and the other article by Lisa Mullen compares East Coca with The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which is another film by Powell and Pressburger. I think a comparison between Eliot's comedies and the Archers films might be very productive. So coming back to the cocktail party, the Guardians, the characters called the Guardians, Sir Henry, Julia, and Alex, form an alliance to watch over those needing guidance. The planned rescue of souls that are lost or in distress is the central theme of Eliot's The Cocktail Party. Interestingly, the years of the immediate post-war in the second half of the 1940s saw a proliferation of Hollywood so-called fantasy comedies, featuring angels or ghosts who guard the protagonists and facilitate their personal or spiritual transformation. Among the best known in this category are It's a Wonderful Life. You may get a chance to watch it this Christmas again. The Bishop's Wife, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, or even Miracle on 34th Street. All these films from the 40s, around the same year that The Cocktail Party was first performed. Was Eliot influenced by, or did he even saw any of these films? Probably not, but we may establish connections with his play, even though The Cocktail Party is still a very different, higher type of comedy. But it is interesting to note how it shares a social imaginary with more popular comedies. The Cocktail Party was a commercial success, both in London and New York, and Eliot was even approached about the possibility of adapting it for the big screen, although the project did not materialize. It did have several TV adaptations in subsequent decades, including one in Spain for the famous Estudio Uno filmed plays. I'm coming to my conclusion now. When Peter, one of the characters in the cocktail party, finds out about Celia's tragic death, he's under a state of shock, and he realizes that he had thought of success in the film business, incorporating Celia to his dream so that he could believe in it. Julia, one of the guardians, advises Peter to think of people as film characters or the best casting choices and connect it with his personal troubles. You must have learned how to look at people, Peter, when you look at them with an eye for the films. That is, when you're not concerned with yourself, but just being an eye. You will come to think of Celia like that one day, and then you'll understand her and be reconciled and be happy in the thought of her. These lines are reminiscent, at least to me, of a famous image in Emerson's Nature, that of the transparent eyeball, which is parodied in this caricature here. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. The image stands for communion with nature, the universal being, as an expression of the divine and without the interference of the personal. I am nothing. We could also relate the camera image in the cocktail party with certain forms of objective, dramatic, or mimetic narration, with narrative points of view known as the fly on the wall or the camera eye view. If you've studied narratology, you'll be familiar with this. This is wonderfully conveyed by the opening lines of Christopher Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin, a novel from 1939. I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking, recording the man shaving at the window opposite and the woman in the kimono washing her hair. Without allowing their own feelings to interfere, Lavinia, Edward, and Peter must accept that Celia chose her destiny, which led to a death that, in Sir Henry's choice of adjective, was triumphant. This is expressed through film imagery. They must view Celia as if through the lens of a camera. They must think of her objectively and not in connection with their own feelings. The film image that I've been talking about a lot is that of projection, with different but interrelated meanings. Projection, number one, projection as illusion or self-deception. Celia refers to her love for Edward as a projection. Number two, projection as psychological trouble. Projection is also a key word in psychology, as you probably know. Edward refers to the other figures in his personal hell as merely projections. To explain these two instances, we might refer to the critic Neville Coghill, who made the revealing statement that the picture seemed to be on the screen. This is about the cocktail party, but it really is in the projector, in the self. In other words, it is an internal image that is damaging rather than an external image seen through the camera lens. There are still two more instances. Projection as premonition or intuition. Towards the end of the play, Sir Henry recalls a sort of preternatural experience that he felt on the day that he met Celia. So he says that he saw a projection of her at the moment of death, at the future moment of death. And this is, in a sense, and to use another cinematic term, a flash forward in the play. And finally, number 4, projections as symbols of the temporal that must be left behind. The guardians refer to the projected spirits that might terrify Celia along her spiritual path, her via purgativa, we could say, towards the timeless. These two meanings point to Celia's progress, to spiritual fulfillment, to sainthood, and we may think of projection, the meaning of projection in alchemy, where it designates the process whereby a part of the philosopher's stone was supposed to be transmuted into gold, and that was called projection. And to conclude, I'll go back to Preludes, the poem, and the problem in some sense. The poem Preludes, unlike Preludes, the Cocktail Party is a comedy composed when Eliot's faith was solid, so the characters can hope for a meaningful existence. Celia has succeeded through her triumphant death as a martyr. Lavinia and Edward have overcome their marital crisis by accepting each other. Again, in Sir Henry's words, they have made the best of a bad job. Carol Smith, who was a scholar who studied Eliot's drama, in her interpretation of the play, she says that they've taken the negative and affirmative paths, respectively. Peter's future, Peter, the cinema worker, film artist, his future is in suspense, but at one point in the play, the guardians suggest that they have connections in California, the land of cinema, and they will keep an eye on him. And I'll leave it here. I hope I haven't taken up too much time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be very happy to hear your comments and questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dídac, for your very insightful lecture. I think you have raised many issues here. You're welcome to ask questions. You don't need to raise your hand. So, I don't know, Alejandro, Andrea, whoever. You just unmute yourself and you formulate your question.
Hello again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dídac, for your insightful talk on Eliot and cinema. I was wondering is it possible to apply Eliot's concept of the objective correlative to cinema? Since you talked about projections, I was wondering if that would be possible.
You mean cinema as an objective correlative?
Yes. Or the characters in cinema as an objective correlative, perhaps.
Yes, well, I think I mentioned at one point of the talk that Peter is working on a documentary film, and they want to reproduce an English mansion in California as a set. And I think that would be a very good objective correlative, the set that they're building, of the sort of vacuity, if you like, of film or the film industry. So that would be a good example of an objective correlative in this play. I think it's hard to think of cinema in general as an objective correlative. We would need to think what it would be an objective correlative of. Maybe for those of you who are not so familiar with Eliot, the objective correlative a situation or an image that stands for something, and it's sort of central to a play. It's central in drama. Yeah, I think in The Cocktail Party that would be a good example. I'm not so sure about cinema in general as an objective correlative. I'd need to think more about that. But thanks, that's a very good question.
Oh, I understood her question differently. I
Okay.
think that the cinema works with objective correlatives because each image, as photography too, each image becomes an objective correlative of something larger. And cinema, after all, is a succession of objective correlatives.
Yeah, I think maybe we could see that very clearly in that clip from the Jan Epstein film, which was very symbolic. It's narrative, but it's very symbolic at the same time. And of course, all these symbols have the potential for being interpreted as objective correlatives.
It was very interesting because you talked about Eliot's ambivalence towards film. I think it has very much to do with, I mean, Eliot was not a vorticist, but it has much to do with a modernism rejection of the different phases of isms that compose modernism. So it started with symbolism, imagism, vorticism, and all these isms were later on discarded. And one important feature of vorticism is its opposition to imagism. And in this opposition, the vorticist artist believes that symbolism is a mere passive recording of sensations. And the vorticist has to be an artist who controls, manipulates consciously these sensations. He's not a hedonist. And maybe Pound's Husserl and Moberly illustrates this. The vorticists believe that cinema is an art, of course. It was the beginning of movies. It was the beginning of the cinema. Is a passive recording of images, and that's why they reject it. And a strong artist, he has to do something with these images, not only to record them. And I think the difference, Eliot talking in 1923, earlier maybe, about movies, and then 1923, and then later, has something to do with this moving away from this rejection of symbolism, which the modernists advocated at the beginning of the movement.
Yes, if you think of the poems in Prufrock and other observations, there's this portrayal or the depiction of automatism. I was talking a little bit about that and the kind of automatic actions. And I can see how Eliot maybe could see a bit of that in early films. And then there's Chaplin, who probably caricatures that a little bit, but he adds something else. And that's probably why Eliot is interested in Chaplin's acting, and he considers it an inspiration for drama, for modern drama. Was Pound interested in film?
No.
No.
In his vortices phase, Pound, like Wyndham Lewis, and all the people of the blast group, they were against the cinema because they believed that that only a passive artist could simply record impressions. And
Yeah.
Hugo Moberly dies on island Moluccas because he's a hedonist. He doesn't know how to shape these images into something new. Sorry. Eliot was never a vorticist, but these were the theories that were in the air. And during the First World War, he shared them. And also, cinema was in its beginnings, and it was very primitive, right? Has nothing to do with becoming an art later on.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for that.
Are there more questions? I particularly liked very much the way you related Eliot to film, because this is an area that hasn't been really studied too much. And
There's also the whole body of Hale letters. There's lots of references to film there, which I don't think anyone has taken the trouble to to analyze yet.
and also, for example, Pound, he blasted the cinema. I mean, somebody who, it was just an automatic recording of images. But at the same time, these cinematic effects are present in the poems. The poems of HD are about, I mean, they record how darkness sets in as if it were a cinematic movement. Carlos Williams too, and Pound too, and in his later in in his when he got older, he loved Disney.
Yeah. Yes.
And considered Disney as one of the main artists who did something to shape a world of art. He was like a cultural hero. He placed Disney in the same line with Linnaeus and Frobenius and all these wise men. So,
Yes,
but
they were kind of fascinated with the Disney's Fantasia,
yeah,
the kind of Fantasia film, which was very influential artistically.
Okay, are there more questions? Well, if there are not, then we thank you very much. It was a
Thank
privilege,
you.
honor to have you lecture for our students. You are invited to come back whenever
Oh,
you
thank you.
and we thank you very much for your lecture.
On the contrary, I was very pleased to be part of this lecture series, and thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Okay, I will stop the recording. Let's see if I can do that.